My name is Thomas McKenzie, and for the past 7 years, I've lived alone in the deep woods of Oregon, cutting timber and keeping to myself. After losing my wife Sarah and our unborn child in childbirth, I found solace in the isolation of the forest, where the only sounds were the wind through the pines and the rhythm of my axe against wood. The cabin I built with my own hands sits in a clearing 20 miles from the nearest town, accessible only by a narrow dirt road that most folks have forgotten exists. It was a cold October morning in 1889 when everything changed. The rain had been falling steadily for 3 days, turning the forest floor into a muddy mess and making outdoor work nearly impossible. I was sitting by my fireplace, sharpening my tools and nursing a cup of coffee, when I heard something that didn't belong to the natural symphony of the woods. It was the sound of crying, not the cry of a wild animal, but unmistakably human. At first, I thought my mind was playing tricks on me. Living alone for so long can make a man hear things that aren't there, but the sound persisted, carried on the wind through the rain. I pulled on my heavy coat and boots, grabbed my rifle, you never know what you might encounter in these woods, and stepped out into the downpour. The crying seemed to be coming from the direction of the old logging road that ran past my property. I followed the sound, my boots squelching in the mud with each step. What I found when I reached the fence line that marked the boundary of my land stopped me cold. Tied to the wooden fence posts with rough rope, soaked to the bone and shivering in the rain, was a young woman holding a baby. She couldn't have been more than 20 years old, with long auburn hair plastered to her head and a simple dress that had once been blue but was now dark with rainwater. The baby in her arms was wrapped in what looked like a torn piece of blanket. Crying weakly, the woman's wrists were bound to the fence posts, stretched apart in a way that must have been agonizing. Her face was bruised, with a split lip and a black eye that spoke of recent violence. But what struck me most was the fierce determination in her green eyes as she tried to shield her baby from the rain with her own body. "Please," she called out when she saw me approaching, her voice hoarse from crying for help. "Please help my baby. I don't care what happens to me, but please save my child." I lowered my rifle and rushed to her side. "Who did this to you?" I asked, pulling out my knife to cut the ropes that bound her. "My husband," she whispered, wincing as circulation returned to her hands. He said we were a burden he couldn't afford anymore. "What's your name?" Mary Patterson. "And this is my son, James." I cut through the last of the ropes and caught Mary as she collapsed, her legs unable to support her after hours of being tied in that position. The baby continued to cry, a weak, hungry sound that tore at my heart. "How long have you been here?" "Since yesterday evening. He tied us here and said said if we were lucky, someone would find us before the wolves did." The casual cruelty of it made my blood boil. What kind of man abandons his wife and child to die in the wilderness? "Can you walk?" I asked. Mary tried to stand but stumbled. "I don't think so. My legs." Without hesitation, I scooped her up in my arms, baby and all. She was lighter than I expected, probably from not eating properly for who knows how long. "My cabin's not far," I said. "We'll get you both warm and dry." The walk back to my cabin felt like the longest 20 minutes of my life. Mary drifted in and out of consciousness, and the baby's cries grew weaker. I found myself praying to a God I hadn't spoken to since Sarah died, begging him not to let me lose another woman and child. When we reached the cabin, I kicked open the door and carried them straight to the fireplace. I laid Mary down on the bearskin rug in front of the fire and quickly added more logs to build up the heat. "We need to get you out of these wet clothes," I said, then realized how that might sound. "Ill. I'll get you something dry to wear, and turn around while you change." Mary nodded weakly. "The baby first, please." I gently took little James from her arms. He was so small, probably no more than 3 or 4 months old, with his mother's auburn hair and pale skin that was frighteningly cold to the touch. I found some clean cloth and carefully unwrapped his wet blanket, drying him as gently as I could. "Is he?" Mary asked fearfully. "He's breathing," I assured her. "Cold and hungry, but alive." I wrapped James in one of my flannel shirts. It was huge on him, but it was warm and dry. Then I helped Mary to the bedroom, giving her privacy to change into some of Sarah's clothes that I'd never been able to bring myself to get rid of. They fit reasonably well, though Mary was smaller than Sarah had been. When she emerged from the bedroom, wearing Sarah's green wool dress, I felt a strange pang in my chest. It wasn't that Mary looked like Sarah, they were quite different, but seeing someone else in those clothes brought back memories I'd been trying to suppress for years. "Thank you," Mary said softly, settling back down by the fire with James. "I don't know how to repay your kindness." "You don't need to repay anything. What you need is food and rest." I went to the kitchen and prepared a simple meal of bread, cheese, and soup. As Mary ate slowly at first, then with increasing hunger, I found myself studying her face. Beneath the bruises and exhaustion, she was quite beautiful, with delicate features and those striking green eyes. But more than that, there was a strength about her, a resilience that had kept her fighting even in the most desperate circumstances. "Tell me about your husband," I said gently. Mary's face darkened. "Robert Patterson. We met in Portland 2 years ago. He seemed charming at first, but after we married, She touched her bruised cheek unconsciously. He had a temper, and when James was born, he said we were too expensive to keep. Where are you from originally? Boston. My parents died when I was 18, and I came west looking for a new start. I thought I'd found it with Robert. Any other family? None that would take me in. Robert made sure to isolate me from anyone who might help. I felt a familiar anger building in my chest. I'd seen men like Robert Patterson before, bullies who preyed on those weaker than themselves. Well, you're safe now, I said. Both of you? For how long? Mary asked, and there was a weariness in her voice that spoke of too many broken promises. You don't know me. You don't owe me anything. Why would you help strangers? It was a fair question, and one I wasn't sure I could answer completely. Because it's the right thing to do, I said finally. And because, ... because I know what it's like to lose family. You're married? Was my wife Sarah died 7 years ago, along with our child. I'm sorry. So am I. But maybe this is a chance for all of us to start over. That night, I gave Mary and James my bed while I slept. On the floor by the fireplace, I lay awake for hours, listening to the soft sounds of a woman and baby sleeping in my home for the first time in 7 years. It felt strange, almost surreal, but also somehow right. The next morning, I awoke to the smell of bacon cooking and coffee brewing. I found Mary in the kitchen, moving carefully but determinedly as she prepared breakfast. You should be resting, I said. I need to earn my keep, she replied. I won't be a burden. You're not a burden, you're a guest. For how long? You can't want strangers living in your home indefinitely. I poured myself a cup of coffee and considered her question. The truth was, I hadn't thought that far ahead. I'd acted on instinct when I found them, driven by basic human decency, and perhaps something deeper that I wasn't ready to examine. Stay as long as you need to, I said finally, until you figure out what you want to do next. And if Robert comes looking for us, then he'll have to go through me. Mary studied my face, as if trying to determine whether I meant it. Whatever she saw there seemed to satisfy her, because she nodded and turned back to the stove. I can cook, clean, and mend clothes, she said. I won't be useless while I'm here. I'm sure you won't be. Over the next few days, we settled into an unexpected routine. Mary proved to be an excellent cook and housekeeper, transforming my bachelor cabin into something that felt like a real home. She had a way of making even simple meals special, and she kept the place cleaner than it had been since Sarah died. Little James began to thrive as well. With regular feeding and warmth, his color improved and his cries became stronger and more demanding. Mary was a devoted mother, attentive to his every need, and I found myself enjoying the sounds of a baby in the house. But it was the evenings I treasured most. After James was asleep, Mary and I would sit by the fire and talk. She told me about her life in Boston, her dreams of seeing the frontier, and her hopes for James's future. I found myself sharing stories about Sarah, about my work in the woods, and about the loneliness that had been my constant companion for 7 years. Do you ever think about leaving here? Mary asked one evening. Going back to civilization? Sometimes. But this place, it's where I built my life with Sarah. Leaving feels like abandoning her memory. Or maybe it would be honoring it by choosing to live again. Her words hit closer to home than I cared to admit. For 7 years, I'd been existing rather than living, going through the motions of life without really participating in it. What about you? I asked. What do you want for your future? I want James to grow up safe and loved. I want him to have opportunities I never had. Beyond that, she shrugged. I'm just taking it one day at a time. He's lucky to have you as a mother. Sometimes I wonder, if I'd been stronger, if I'd left Robert sooner. You can't blame yourself for his actions. You did what you had to do to survive, did I? Or did I just endure until someone else had to save me? You saved yourself, I said firmly. You kept yourself and James alive until help could come. That took incredible strength. Mary looked at me with something like gratitude in her eyes. Thank you for saying that. I needed to hear it. As the days passed, I began to realize that Mary and James had brought something back to my life that I had thought was gone forever. Purpose. Taking care of them, protecting them, providing for them. It gave me a reason to get up each morning beyond simple survival. But I also knew that this arrangement couldn't last forever. Eventually, Mary would want to move on, to build an independent life for herself and her son. The thought of returning to my solitary existence filled me with a dread I hadn't expected. It was 2 weeks after I'd found them when Robert Patterson finally came looking for his wife and child. I was outside chopping wood when I heard the sound of a horse approaching. Mary was inside with James, and something in the way she tensed when she heard the hoofbeats told me who our visitor was before I saw him. Robert Patterson was a tall, thin man with cold blue eyes and a cruel mouth. He rode up to my cabin like he owned the place, dismounting with an arrogance that immediately set my teeth on edge. You McKenzie? He asked without preamble. I am. You're on my property. I'm here for my wife and son. I know they're here. I don't know what you're talking about. Don't play games with me, Lumberjack. I tracked him here. Mary, he shouted toward the cabin. Get out here now. I stepped between him and the cabin door, my axe still in my hands. Like I said, you're on my property, and you're not welcome. Robert's eyes narrowed. That's my wife and my son in there. I have a legal right to them. You gave up any rights when you tied them to a fence and left them to die. A man has a right to discipline his family as he sees fit. Discipline. I felt my temper rising. Call abandoning a woman and baby in the wilderness. Discipline. They were costing me more than they were worth. I gave them a chance to find someone else to take care of them. The casual way he spoke about his wife and child, as if they were livestock he was disposing of, made me want to plant my axe in his skull. Well, they found someone, I said. Now get off my land. I'm not leaving without them. Yes, you are. Robert's hand moved toward the gun at his hip. You really want to die for another man's family? The question is whether you want to die. Trying to take them. We stood there for a long moment, sizing each other up. Robert was armed, but I had the advantage of size and strength, plus the motivation of protecting people I'd come to care about. Finally, Robert's nerve broke. This isn't over, he said, backing toward his horse. They belong to me, and I'll get them back. If you come back here, you won't leave alive, I said quietly. That's not a threat. It's a promise. After he rode away, I found Mary sitting on the floor of the cabin, holding James and shaking. He'll be back, she whispered. He won't give up. Then we'll be ready for him. This isn't your fight, Thomas. I knelt down beside her and gently touched her face. Yes, it is. You and James, you're my family now, and I protect my family. The look in Mary's eyes told me that she felt the same way. Whatever was happening between us, it was real, and it was worth fighting for. But I knew Robert Patterson wouldn't give up easily. The real battle was just beginning. The weeks following Robert's visit were tense ones. I found myself constantly on guard, watching the tree line for any sign of his return. I taught Mary how to use my spare rifle and showed her the best hiding spots around the cabin, in case trouble came when I was out working. But despite the underlying threat, something beautiful was growing between us. What had started as simple compassion had deepened into something neither of us had expected. Mary was nothing like Sarah. Where Sarah had been gentle and soft-spoken, Mary was fierce and determined. But she brought her own kind of light to my dark world. I never thought I could feel safe with a man again. Mary confided one evening as we sat by the fire. James was sleeping peacefully in the makeshift cradle I'd built for him. Robert hurt you, didn't he? Not just physically. He made me believe I was worthless, that I was lucky he tolerated me at all. It took me a long time to realize that the problem wasn't me. You're the strongest person I know, I said, and I meant it. What you've survived, what you've overcome, it's remarkable. I don't feel strong. Most days I feel like I'm barely holding it together. Strength isn't about not being afraid. It's about doing what needs to be done despite the fear. Mary looked at me with those green eyes that had become so dear to me. Is that what you're doing? Taking care of us despite being afraid? I'm not afraid of taking care of you. I'm afraid of losing you. The admission hung in the air between us. We'd been dancing around our feelings for weeks, both of us too scared to name what was happening. Thomas, Mary said softly, I need you to know, I care about you. More than I should. Considering, double quotes, considering what? Considering I'm still legally married to a man who wants to kill you for protecting me? Legal documents don't make a marriage. Love and commitment do. And from what you've told me, Robert never offered you either. No, he didn't. But that doesn't change the fact that I come with complications. Everyone comes with complications. The question is whether the person is worth dealing with them. And am I worth it? I reached over and took her hand. Mary, you and James have given me back my life. You've made me remember what it feels like to have something worth protecting, worth fighting for. Of course you're worth it. That night, for the first time since she'd arrived, Mary kissed me. It was gentle, tentative, as if she was afraid I might reject her. Instead, I pulled her closer, marveling at how right it felt to hold her in my arms. I love you, I whispered against her hair. I love you too, she whispered back. God help me, I do. The next morning brought a new challenge. I was outside splitting logs when I heard riders approaching, not just one horse this time, but several. My blood ran cold as I counted 5 men riding toward my cabin. Robert Patterson in the lead. Mary, I called, take James and get to the root cellar. Now, she appeared in the doorway, saw the riders, and immediately understood. Within seconds, she had disappeared with the baby. Following the escape plan we'd practiced, I stood in front of my cabin, axe in hand, as the 5 men dismounted. Besides Robert, there were 4 other men I didn't recognize, rough-looking types who had the appearance of hired guns. McKenzie, Robert said with a cold smile. I told you this wasn't over. I told you what would happen if you came back. 5 against 1. You like those odds? Better than you might think. One of the hired men, a scarred individual with dead eyes, stepped forward. This doesn't have to be difficult, Lumberjack. Just hand over the woman and child, and we'll be on our way. Not going to happen? Then you're going to die for nothing. They're not even your family. They are now. Robert laughed harshly. You think Mary actually cares about you? She's using you, just like she used me. Women like her are parasites, latching on to whatever man can provide for them. You're describing yourself, Patterson. Mary's nothing like that, isn't she? Ask her about the money she stole from me before she ran. I felt a flicker of doubt, which Robert must have seen because his smile widened. She didn't tell you about that, did she? Took every cent I had saved and disappeared in the night. I tracked her here because I want my money back. Even if that were true, it wouldn't justify what you did to her. What I did, I gave her a home, food, clothes, and she repaid me by stealing from me and running off with my son. Your son that you left tied to a fence to die. I knew someone would find them. I was teaching them a lesson about what happens when you cross me. The casual cruelty in his voice reminded me exactly why I was willing to fight these men. Even if Mary had taken his money, and I wasn't convinced she had, it wouldn't justify his treatment of her and James. Last chance, McKenzie, the scarred gunman said. Hand them over, or we take them over your dead body. Then I guess you'll have to kill me. The gunman's hand moved toward his weapon, but I was already in motion. 7 years of swinging an axe had given me reflexes and strength these men weren't expecting. I buried the axe in the gunman's chest before his gun cleared leather. The other 3 hired men went for their weapons, but I had already rolled behind the woodpile I'd been working on. Bullets splintered the logs around me as I drew my own pistol. I wasn't a gunfighter, but I was a good shot, and I had the advantage of cover and desperation. I took down 2 more of the hired men before they could find adequate shelter. That left Robert and 1 gunman, both of whom had taken cover behind their horses. This is pointless, Robert shouted. You can't protect them forever. I can protect them from you. Even if you kill us all, there will be others. I've put the word out. There's a bounty on Mary's head. What are you talking about? She's wanted for theft. I've got the law on my side. I felt my heart sink. If Robert had somehow convinced the authorities that Mary was a thief, it would complicate everything. But I couldn't worry about that now. I had to deal with the immediate threat. The remaining gunman made a break for better cover, and I put a bullet in his leg, sending him sprawling. That left only Robert, who seemed to realize his situation was hopeless. This isn't over, he screamed as he mounted his horse. I'll be back with the law. You can't hide her forever. He rode off, leaving his dead and wounded companions behind. I quickly checked on the wounded gunman. He'd live, but he wouldn't be riding anywhere soon. Mary, I called. It's safe. She emerged from the root cellar with James, her face pale, but determined. I heard shooting. Are you hurt? I'm fine, but we need to talk. I told her what Robert had said about the theft charges. Watching her face carefully, I saw shame there, but not surprise. It's true, isn't it? I said gently. Mary nodded, tears streaming down her face. I took the money he'd been saving, but Thomas, you have to understand, it was money he'd made selling my jewelry, things that belonged to my mother, and I only took what I needed to get away from him. Why didn't you tell me? Because I was afraid you'd think less of me. I was afraid you'd send us away. I pulled her into my arms. Mary, I don't care about Robert's money, but if he's convinced, the law that you're a thief, we have a problem. What do? We get ahead of this. I have friends in town, people who know me, who listen to our side of the story. We'll go to the sheriff ourselves and explain what really happened. And if he doesn't believe us, then we'll figure something else out. But I'm not letting Robert use the law to get his hands on you and James. The next day, we made the trip to town. It was the first time Mary had left the cabin since I'd found her, and I could see how nervous she was. James seemed to sense his mother's tension and fussed more than usual. Sheriff Williams was a fair man who'd known me for years. He listened to our story with a thoughtful expression, occasionally asking questions for clarification. So you're saying Patterson tied his own wife and child to a fence and left them to die? He asked. That's exactly what I'm saying. I found them there myself, and the money Mary took was rightfully hers to begin with. Mary said quietly, it was money Robert got from selling my mother's jewelry without my permission. Can you prove that? Mary's face fell. No, I don't have any documentation. Sheriff Williams was quiet for a long moment. Here's the thing, he said finally. Robert Patterson was here yesterday, making all kinds of accusations, but he couldn't provide any proof either. No witnesses to the alleged theft, no documentation of the money's existence, just his word against yours. So what does that mean? I asked. It means I'm not inclined to arrest anyone based on unsubstantiated claims, especially when those claims come from a man who, by his own admission, abandoned his wife and child in the wilderness. I felt a wave of relief wash over me. However, the sheriff continued, I should warn you that Patterson seemed pretty determined. He might try to take matters into his own hands. He already has. He came to my place yesterday with 4 hired guns, and 3 of them won't be troubling anyone anymore. The 4th is probably still crawling back to town. Sheriff Williams raised an eyebrow. Self-defense. They drew first. I'll need to investigate, of course. But if it happened the way you say it did, you were within your rights to defend your property and the people under your protection. As we prepared to leave, the sheriff pulled me aside. Tom, I've known you for a long time. You're a good man. But this situation... It's complicated. Patterson's got money, and money talks. He might try to bring in federal marshals or hired guns from outside my jurisdiction. What are you saying? I'm saying you might want to consider taking Mary and the boy somewhere safe until this blows over. Running away isn't going to solve anything. Maybe not, but it might keep you all alive. That night, Mary and I discussed our options. We could stay and fight, risking everything on the hope that justice would prevail. Or we could leave, starting over somewhere Robert couldn't find us. What do you want to do? I asked her. I want to stop running, she said firmly. I want to build a life somewhere and not have to look over my shoulder constantly. Then we stay and fight, even if it means risking your life. Especially then. You and James are worth fighting for. Mary took my hand. I have something to tell you. What? I'm pregnant. The words hit me like a lightning bolt. Are you sure? I've been sure for a week, I just didn't know how to tell you. Is it yours? It has to be, the timing. It's yours. Thomas. I pulled her into my arms, overwhelmed by a mixture of joy and terror. Another child, another chance at the family I'd lost, but also another person to protect, another life at stake in this conflict with Robert. We're going to get through this. I promised her, all of us. I hope so, because I can't bear the thought of this child growing up without a father the way James might have to. That's not going to happen. I'm not going anywhere. But even as I said the words, I wondered if I was making a promise I might not be able to keep. Robert Patterson had proven he was willing to go to any lengths to get what he wanted, and now the stakes were higher than ever. Winter came early that year, blanketing the forest in snow and making travel difficult. I hoped the harsh weather might discourage Robert from making another attempt to take Mary and James, but I should have known better. Men like Robert don't give up easily, especially when their pride is at stake. Mary's pregnancy was progressing well, though she was often sick in the mornings. I did my best to take care of her, bringing her tea and toast in bed and handling more of the household chores. James was growing stronger every day and had begun to crawl around the cabin, getting into everything with the curiosity of a healthy baby. It was during one of these peaceful domestic moments that our world exploded. Was outside chopping firewood when I heard the sound of many horses approaching through the snow. This time, I counted at least 8 riders, and my heart sank as I recognized not just Robert Patterson among them, but also a man wearing a federal marshal's badge. Mary, I called. Company coming. She appeared in the doorway, James in her arms, and immediately understood the situation. But this time, there was nowhere to run. The snow was too deep, and Mary was in no condition for a difficult escape through the wilderness. Stay inside, I told her. Whatever happens, stay inside with James. The riders stopped in front of my cabin, and the marshal dismounted first. He was a tall, serious-looking man with gray hair and cold eyes. Thomas McKenzie, he asked. That's me. I'm Marshal Davis. I have a warrant for the arrest of Mary Patterson on charges of theft. My heart sank, but I kept my voice steady. Aunt, whose complaint? Her husband, Robert Patterson. He's provided evidence that she stole a significant sum of money from him. What evidence? The marshal pulled out a piece of paper. Bank records showing a withdrawal of $500 from Mr. Patterson's account, made with a forged signature. I felt the ground shifting beneath my feet. Robert had been busy during the month since his last visit, apparently manufacturing evidence to support his claims. I'd like to see those records, I said. You can examine them after Mrs. Patterson is in custody now. I need you to step aside so I can execute this warrant. She's not Mrs. Patterson anymore, I said. She's my wife. It was a lie, but a necessary one. If Mary was legally my wife, it might complicate Robert's claims. The marshal raised an eyebrow. You have documentation of this marriage. We were married by a traveling preacher. The paperwork is being processed. Robert stepped forward, his face twisted with rage. That's impossible. She's still married to me. Bigamy is a serious charge, the marshal said thoughtfully. If Mrs. Patterson married you while still legally wed to Mr. Patterson, that's a federal crime. I realized I'd made a mistake. In trying to protect Mary, I'd potentially made things worse. Marshal, I said, before you arrest anyone, I think you should hear the whole story. I'm listening. I told him everything. How I'd found Mary and James tied to the fence. Robert's abandonment of his family, the attacks on my property. The marshal listened without expression, occasionally asking questions for clarification. These are serious allegations, he said when I finished. Mr. Patterson, how do you respond? He's lying, Robert snarled. I never tied anyone to a fence. I came here peacefully to retrieve my stolen property and my son, and this man attacked me. What about the money? The marshal asked. Mrs. Patterson claims it was obtained by selling her personal belongings without permission. She has no proof of that. Those bank records show she forged my signature to steal my money. I studied the bank records the marshal showed me. They looked official, but something about them bothered me. The handwriting was too neat, too perfect. Marshal, I said, I'd like to suggest we take this matter to town and sort it out properly. If Mrs. Patterson is guilty of theft, she should face trial. But if these documents are forged, then Mr. Patterson should face charges for filing false accusations. The marshal considered this. That's reasonable. Mrs. Patterson will need to come with me for questioning. I understand, but given her condition, I'd like to request that she be allowed to remain in town rather than being held in jail. What condition? She's pregnant. Robert's face went white. That's impossible. The child would have to be mine, I finished. Which it is. The marshal looked between us, clearly trying to sort out the competing claims. This is getting complicated. I think we do need to take this to town and get it sorted out properly. Fine, I said, but I'm coming with her, of course. And Mr. Patterson, you'll need to come as well to answer questions about these allegations. As we prepared for the journey to town, Mary pulled me aside. Thomas, those bank records, they're fake. How can you be sure? Because Robert never had a bank account. He kept all his money hidden in the house. He didn't trust banks. Can you prove that? Maybe, if we can find someone who knew him in Portland, someone who can testify about his habits. It was a slim hope, but it was something. The journey to town was tense and uncomfortable. Mary rode in a wagon I'd hastily prepared, wrapped in blankets against the cold. James fussed constantly, sensing the tension around him. The marshal and his men maintained a professional distance, while Robert glared at us with undisguised hatred. When we reached town, the marshal arranged for Mary to stay at the local hotel, under guard rather than in jail, acknowledging her pregnancy and the presence of the baby. I was allowed to stay with her, though we were watched constantly. What happens now? Mary asked, as we settled into the hotel room. Now we prove Robert is lying. I'm going to send telegrams to Portland, to anyone who might have known Robert there. If we can find someone who knew about his financial habits, someone who can testify that he never used banks, that could take weeks. Then we wait weeks. But Robert wasn't content to wait. That evening, I overheard him talking to some of the men he'd brought with him, planning something that sounded like an attempt to take James by force. I immediately went to the marshal. Davis, I think Patterson is planning to kidnap the baby. That's a serious accusation. Do you have proof? I overheard him talking to his men about taking the boy tonight. The marshal frowned. Even if Mrs. Patterson is guilty of theft, the child's custody would be a separate legal matter. Mr. Patterson has no right to take the boy without a court order. Try telling him that night I barely slept, listening for any sound that might indicate trouble. Around midnight, I heard soft footsteps in the hallway outside our room. I quietly woke Mary and motioned for her to take James into the bathroom. Then I positioned myself by the door with my rifle. The footsteps stopped outside our room. I heard the soft sound of someone trying the door handle. I know you're out there, Robert, I called softly. The marshal is in the next room. You really want to try this? The footsteps retreated, but I knew this wasn't over. The next morning brought unexpected news. A telegram had arrived from Portland, sent by a banker who remembered Robert Patterson. Mr. Patterson was well known to us. The telegram read, he frequently spoke against banks and banking, claiming they were institutions designed to rob honest working men. To our knowledge, he never maintained an account with any bank in Portland. It was exactly what we needed. The marshal examined the telegram carefully, then looked at the bank records Robert had provided. Mr. Patterson, he said, this telegram suggests you never had a bank account in Portland. How do you explain these bank records? Robert's face flushed red. That banker is lying. I had an account. Then you won't mind if I send a telegram to this bank, asking them to confirm these records. That is. The bank might have made errors in their records, Mr. Patterson. I'm beginning to suspect these documents are fraudulent. That's a federal crime. You can't prove anything. But the marshal was already examining the bank records more carefully. The paper is wrong, he said finally. This isn't bank paper. And the ink, it's too fresh for documents that are supposedly months old. Robert realized his scheme was falling apart. Even if the bank records are wrong, she still stole from me. She took my money and ran. What money? Mary spoke up for the first time. You never had any money. Robert, you spent everything on drinking and gambling. The only money I took was what I got from selling my mother's jewelry. Jewelry you had no right to sell in the first place. You can't prove that either. Actually, I can. Mary reached into her bag and pulled out a small item wrapped in cloth. I kept one piece, my mother's wedding ring. It has an inscription inside with my parents' names and wedding dates. Anyone who knew my family in Boston can verify it belonged to my mother. The marshal examined the ring carefully. This is evidence that at least some of the items in question belonged to Mrs. Patterson's family. Robert was trapped, and he knew it. His face contorted with rage as he realized his carefully constructed lies were falling apart. This isn't over, he screamed. She's still my wife. The boy is still my son. I have rights. Your rights ended when you abandoned them to die, I said quietly. And as for Mary being your wife, I think we can fix that. I turned to the marshal. Is there a judge in town who can perform marriages? Judge Harrison, why? Because I'd like to marry Mary, properly and legally, right now. Mary looked at me with surprise and love. Thomas, you don't have to. I want to. I love you, and I want to make this official, but the baby will be born legitimate, with my name and my protection. An hour later, we stood before Judge Harrison in his chambers. Mary wore the same green dress she'd worn the day I found her, but she'd never looked more beautiful. James gurgled happily. In my arms as we exchanged vows. Do you, Thomas McKenzie, take Mary to be your lawfully wedded wife? I do. Do you, Mary Patterson, take Thomas to be your lawfully wedded husband? I do. Then by the power vested in me by the territory of Oregon, I pronounce you husband and wife. As I kissed my new wife, I heard Robert screaming protests in the background. but they no longer mattered. Mary was legally my wife now, James was my son, and the child she carried would be born into a family protected by law. The marshal arrested Robert for filing false documents and attempting to kidnap James. The last I saw of him, he was being led away in chains, still screaming threats and curses. "Is it really over?" Mary asked, as we prepared to return to our cabin. "It's over," I assured her. "We're a family now, legally and in every way that matters." 6 months later, our daughter, Sarah, was born, named for my first wife, with Mary's blessing. She was healthy and strong, with her mother's green eyes and what promised to be her father's stubborn streak, as I held my new daughter while Mary nursed her. With James playing at our feet, I marveled at how much my life had changed. A year ago, I'd been a lonely widower living in isolation. Now I was surrounded by family, by love, by the sounds and chaos and joy of a real home. "Any regrets?" Mary asked, reading my thoughts. "Only one," I said. "What's that?" "I regret that it took me so long to find you." Mary smiled and leaned against my shoulder. "You found me exactly when you were supposed to, when we both needed saving." She was right. Sometimes the best things in life come from the most unexpected places, even from finding a desperate woman and baby tied to a fence in the rain. Sometimes salvation comes disguised as someone else's crisis, and love grows from the simple act of doing what's right. I'd lost one family to tragedy, but I'd gained another through compassion. And this time, I was determined to protect what I'd been given, to cherish every moment, and to never take for granted the miracle of having people to love. Outside, the Oregon forest stretched endlessly in all directions, wild and beautiful, and full of possibilities. Inside our cabin, 3 generations of McKenzies were building a life together, one day at a time. It was more than enough. It was everything. The end.